Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that if you are just logging on or watching at home, that you're doing well and you've been enjoying what seems to be a turn toward more spring weather. I know I'm super excited about that. My name is Jessica Stanley. I am one of the English faculty members at John Tyler. And one of the things that has gotten me through the past year and helped me relax in spite of all the craziness is sculpting with polymer clay. Um, so if you've seen these videos before, you know the spiel if you're logging in for the first time. Polymer clay is an oven bake clay. So you buy it in a package that looks something like this. You sculpt with it, you make whatever project you're working on, and then you put it in the oven to make the clay set and harden. From there, you can paint it, you can add other decorations to it, and it's really a lot of fun. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. You can make like hyper realistic creations, you can make cuter things, you can make recreations of favorite like cartoon characters. Really, the sky is the limit. Um, so to go off of or to kind of take inspiration from the spring weather that we're starting to have, this week we are going to be looking at making some spring themed magnets. This is one of my favorite projects because it's small. It doesn't take a huge amount of clay, and there's a lot of versatility in what we're going to learn. So I have an example here to show you. You can see this is my magnet that I made and then painted. When you first get the clay, it comes out of the box like this. But you can add the paint, you can add the decoration later on. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make some of the features that you see on this magnet. The flowers, the vines, the leaves, and then we'll talk about kind of how to put all those things together to make something that is uniquely yours. So the first thing to note, this clay is not food safe. I know I say this in every video, but if this is the first time that you are watching one of these, just be aware of that. I always like to take jewelry off before I start working with it. And I never try to touch things after I've worked with it until I wash my hands. So like don't, stop in the middle and go make a snack or something. Make sure that you wash your hands really well to get that clay residue off of your hands before you eat or do anything like that. When the clay comes out of the box, it's going to be pretty stiff and hard. What I would recommend is breaking the pieces. They'll come in like long strips, but if you break those into smaller pieces, it'll be easier to work that clay into something that you can actually mold. I generally start by taking pieces of it and just kind of squeezing it, pressing it, tearing it, whatever I can do to get it warmed up, because the warmer it is, the softer it will become and the easier it'll be to mold with. You'll start to feel it get more pliable, and that's when you can actually start to like make shapes out of it. So for this magnet craft, we're gonna start with, I always like to start building from kind of the ground up. So I'll turn it over here. You can see this is the back. I have not glued my magnet on yet, but when I do, the magnet will be super glued right here, and then I'll just be able to stick it on the fridge. But to start, you'll see that I've got kind of a circle base that I've built everything else up around. So to make that small base, what I would do is take that piece of clay that you've been working with, pull off a piece that you can roll into a ball. This size is probably good, but you can make yours bigger or smaller, just depending on what you want it to look like. Once you've got that ball, you're gonna take it, put it between two fingers and just gently press down. And then we're gonna keep kind of turning and pressing down. You want to try and get an even thickness all the way around. So turning and pressing kind of helps with that because you're not pressing too hard on one side or the other. Again, this can be a little bit thicker than what I've got. It can also be thinner than what I've got. It's up to you. So what you're going to be left with ultimately is a circle kind of like this. That is roughly the same size as the magnet that I made as the preview. So I think that works. This can also be determined by what size magnet you actually have. What you can do is like hold up that magnet that you're going to glue on the back and just see, like, is it covered by this circle or does the circle need to be bigger? But once you've got that base, the size and the shape that you want it to be, that's when we get to add the fun little decorations. Before we start building onto that base, I want to show you some techniques that can be used to make projects like this one, or to make other things. Right? So we're going to talk about how to make flowers, leaves, vines, and all these different things. We'll start with the flowers, and on my magnet, I've made roses. There are different ways to make different kinds of flowers, and there's lots of tutorials out there on YouTube and on Pinterest, but I'm going to focus today on roses. So to start off your rose, what you want to do is take a piece of clay off of that strip or that ball that you've been working off of. I'm going to make mine bigger than it needs to be for the magnet, just so that I can show you what I'm doing. But you're going to pull a piece of clay off of that ball. Make sure that it's good and soft. So that means kind of working with it for a minute or two, maybe. And then you're going to roll it between your hands so that you make kind of a snake. Ideally, you want the snake to be the same width all the way around. So you may have to like start over or kind of correct what you've done, because you can see on mine, I've got like a thicker part here, a thinner part here. So I'm going to give that another try. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but the closer it can be, it's helpful. So that looks a little better. I think we can work with that. So my next step is to take this snake, or it's really more like a worm, I guess. But I'm going to cut it in half, just right down the middle. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want two fairly even pieces. One of those pieces is then going to be cut into 3 pieces. You want them to be about the same size, but again, if they're not exact, it's not a huge deal. So I've got my 3 pieces, and I'm just going to set those aside. The other half of my snake gets cut in half. So I'm getting 2 pieces out of that one. And those I'm going to set aside as well. My next step is to pick up one of those pieces. I'm going to start with the smallest one and flatten it. This does not have to be like paper thin. It is possible to get this clay so thin that you can hold it up to the light and actually almost see through it. You don't have to get it that thin, but get it fairly thin all the way around. And then you're going to take that piece and roll it into almost like a trumpet shape, like that. This is going to be the inside of your flower. When you're doing roses, you want to start with the inside and work your way out from there. What I like to do is once I've got it like rolled up into that cone shape, is just take the bottom and pinch that so that I've almost got a stem on it. You can see kind of like that. That gives me something to hold on to. So once I start adding the petals, I'm not like squishing them and moving them out of position and out of where I want them. You're going to do the very same thing as far as the pinching and the pressing down with all of the other pieces. And with each one, you're going to layer it onto your flower. So you can do that by just starting with one side and then wrapping around. If you want the petals to flare out a little bit, you can do that. You can kind of manipulate that top edge so that it's a little bit more open. Right? You can keep those tighter. But you're going to keep adding petals until all of those pieces that you cut are gone. And as you add petals, you'll start to see that flower shape really take form. So we're just pressing. And then adding. And then the last one. Go on like that. And so there we have a rose. You'll notice that there's a lot going on down here at the bottom where I've added all these layers. So what you can do once you've got the rose into the shape that you want it is to hold it very gently up near where the petals are, and then take one of your clay tools. You can do this with one of these like specially made clay tools, or you can use like a plastic knife, from a fast food bag. That'll work just as well. But you're going to hold the rose gently and then cut just as straight of a line as you can through that excess clay. Just be careful. It's difficult to cut yourself with these tools, but it is possible. So just be mindful of that. So once you've done that, you're left with a fairly flat base. For something like these magnets, that's definitely what we want, because what's going to happen is that this rose will be glued, or excuse me, not glued, but attached to the base of the magnet. Depending on how big your rose is, that may be all that you decide to put on here. If your rose takes up most of that space, you could put it in the middle and then bake it and paint it. Or you could kind of offset it and add roses of different sizes around it. Right? It's entirely up to you. To attach your rose to this base piece, we're going to use a technique that's called scoring. So with scoring, you rough up two pieces of clay, and that roughness allows them to hold more tightly together, right? So if you're adding one piece of clay to another, it's a way of making them stick more securely. This is important because during the baking process, Occasionally, if pieces are not attached well, they will fall off. And it's a lot more trouble to try and glue them back together later than it is to make sure that they're secure right now. So to score your clay, you can take a sharp tool, like a toothpick, or one of these clay tools, and you're gonna rough up the face of the clay that's going to be attached to your magnet. So you can see kind of what I did there. I scratched it in no particular way. You just want to scratch as much of that base as you can with that tool. Then you're going to do the same thing where you want to attach it onto your magnet. Just get that as roughed up as you can. And then press the two together. What you can also do is smooth the edges together a little bit, especially if your flower is on the edge or the side of that base. You can kind of just smooth with your finger or with one of your tools. This doesn't have to be all the way around. It doesn't have to be really deep, but it's another way of kind of securing those two pieces of clay together. So that is the rose. Again, you can do those as big or as small as you want to, or you can make them in different sizes and almost have like a bouquet that you paint in all different colors. The excess clay that you cut off from the rose can be mushed up again and reused. That's the thing that I love most about this process, is that until you bake the clay, there's always room to go back and reuse it or to restart. So nothing is ever set in stone. If you feel like you messed up, squish it up and try again. Right? Until you bake it, that is always an option. Okay. If you want to add like leaves or vines, like you see on this one, that's another really fun technique. So I'll start with leaves. To make a leaf, you are going to take a piece of your clay, doesn't have to be huge. Again, I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger than I might normally just to show you what I'm doing. But I've got a piece here that's already relatively flat. So I'm just going to tear off part of that. And then right now, I'm going to just pinch it between my fingers to start getting the shape that I want. You can look up different types of leaves, like online, if you want to make a particular type of leaf. But an easy way to do this is kind of like this. So you've got sort of the rounded body that comes to a point at the end, and then a point at the other end. They don't have to be symmetrical because more than likely this other end is going to get cut off. So don't worry about that. You do want to try and get your leaf as flat all the way around as you can. So doing that same kind of pinching motion that we did before will help make sure that it's the same thickness all around. Once you've got it the size and the shape that you want, the next step is to add details. So to do this, I generally like to take, it wouldn't be one of these workshops if I didn't drop something. Anyway, so I like to take this tool, or again, your plastic knife will work just fine for this. But take that tool and you're just going to hold the clay and gently press down in the center. So now you've got a line down the center. You can leave it that way, or you can add veins. Um, to do the veins, you're going to do the very same thing, coming out from that center line. Like that. These don't have to be really deep. They can be, but it's another one of those things that's really up to you. And you can have them as far apart or as close together as you want. But what you're left with ultimately is a leaf that you can add next to your flower. More than likely, you'll want to cut off that piece at the bottom so that it's kind of rounded. Sort of like that. And then you can figure out where on your magnet you want it to be attached. Once you know the spot, you're going to do that very same scoring technique that we did before. What I would recommend is doing the scoring on the back of the leaf, kind of toward the base. Because this is ultimately what's going to be attached to the magnet itself. So once you figure out where you want to put it, you're going to score both pieces and then attach the leaf how you want. Yep. Vines are another really fun detail that can add a lot of character to a piece like this. And these are super easy and really fun to make. So to add some vines, you're gonna take a piece of clay, and just like we did to start the project, you're gonna roll it between your hands like you're making a snake. Except this one you want to be really thin. Depending on the size of your magnet and the size of the other details, you may want yours to be thicker or thinner. You can see on this one, mine are pretty thin. So I had to roll that clay out a fair bit to get it to be that size. If your flower and your leaves are bigger than that, you may want your vine to be thicker as well so that it will stand out. It's entirely up to you. But you want a fair bit of clay to work with so that you can kind of turn it and shape it into whatever curls or patterns you want. It should hold that curl pretty well. And then from there, you can attach it onto the base of your magnet like that. Even after you bake this piece, that curl should stay there. It may flatten out just a little bit, but I've never had a situation where I've made that kind of curly vine and when I've pulled it out of the oven, it's been completely flat. It will hold some of its shape. But what you can do if you're worried about it is kind of over curl it so that way, if some of it falls, you still have some shape there. So those are the three big techniques that I used to make this magnet. Starting with the base and then adding the details up from there. My biggest suggestion is to work that way, where you start from the bottom and work your way up. Start with the base and then layer things on top of it, because it's a lot easier to add a piece of clay on top of another piece than it is to try and fit a piece of clay under another piece. That's much more difficult. So if you are interested, there's one more piece of this magnet that I can show you, and that is the little bunny that's in the center. He was a lot of fun to make, and there's a lot of different animals that you can do to put into your magnet, particularly if you're thinking about like a springtime theme. You could make a bird, you could make a squirrel, you could make pretty much whatever you want. To do the bunny, I didn't spend, because it's so small, I didn't spend a lot of time carving in details. The nice thing about this clay is that if you intend to paint on it after it's baked, you can do a lot of that detail work with just the paint. So what I really focused on for my piece was getting the body to look like I wanted it to. So the first thing I did was start with the body itself. And to get that, I just got a small piece of clay, I sort of rolled it out, not into a perfect circle, but into more of an oval, and then gently flattened it and sort of pinched it and pressed it down until it was the shape that I wanted for the body. Then I started layering on top of that. For the head, I went with the rounder shape. So rather than making that oval, I rolled my piece of clay into another circle. And then same thing, I just very gently pressed on it to flatten it, and then added it on top of the body. Next thing was the ears. Now, if you know anything about rabbits, the ears can go a lot of different ways. They can stick straight up, they can flop down, one could be sticking up, one could be sticking down, entirely up to you. They can also be longer or shorter, depending on what you're going for. So I'm gonna take a small piece of clay, just pulled off from some of my excess that was sitting around, kind of roll it out almost like I'm making a snake, but not very thin, and then press down to flatten. You may have to do this a couple times or very gently kind of pull it to stretch it into the shape that you want for the ear. But once you've got a shape that you like, you're gonna add it behind the head. So that's my first ear, and you can see kind of where it attaches with the head and the body. Then you're gonna do the very same thing with the other ear. If they're not perfectly the same size, that's okay, because one of them can always fit behind the other one. So I've got my bunny. I'm gonna add my second ear. And then my last step, once I've got the ears kind of shaped how I want them to be, is the tail. So for that, you're just gonna do a very small circle, kind of rolling it and then flattening it. And then that circle will get layered on top of the body. So right now, this kind of looks like a bunny, but it could really use some detail, right? So that is where your painting is going to come in. And the painting can work wonders for adding details. If your magnet is very small, like mine, you're gonna want very small brushes in order to paint those details in. What I use, I have a lot of paintbrushes here. But the ones that I use the most often are actually these. These came from Battleground, which if you live in the Midlothian area is the gaming store off of Route 60. And these are normally used to paint miniatures for like Dungeons and Dragons and that type of game. They work really, really well for these small sculptures though. And they come in teeny tiny sizes. This one is like a detail brush. I've got one that is slightly bigger. I've got one that's slightly smaller. But for something like this bunny face, you want a really tiny brush head in order to do like that nose and the eyes successfully. So the smaller the brush you've got, the better off you'll be. I have also made this work with a toothpick when I didn't have access to brushes, but that's a little harder. So if you can get the brushes, I would recommend it. If not, a toothpick will certainly work for adding those really small details. But what I did here with the painting was to start just like I did with the sculpting. Start from the bottom and work your way up. If you look at the back of this, you'll see that kind of sage green color. That's the color that I started with before I started painting anything else. And I went over the magnet with a larger brush just to coat it in that sage color. The reason for that is that I could use that color paint kind of like a primer, so that the rest of the paint that I put on later would stick to the clay a little bit better. Before I really get into talking about the painting though, I do just want to mention, you should not paint until you have baked your project. So once you've got it sculpted the way that you want it, you can put it in the oven and follow the instructions on the clay. Typically what you'll want to do is set your oven to about 275. And then it's a little bit different for everybody. For my oven, about 18 minutes usually works for a project. For some people, you may need to take it out earlier. Others may need to leave it in a little bit longer. But you'll kind of get the feel for that just based on what you know about your particular oven. Do be careful because again, this clay is not food safe. So you don't want to put it directly onto like a baking pan or a baking sheet that you're then going to cook on. I take a small piece of aluminum foil and that's like reserved for my clay work. And so anytime I'm going to bake the polymer clay, I lay that piece of aluminum foil down on my baking sheet and I put the clay on the foil. It can be reused a bunch of times, but that way I'm protecting the stuff that I'm going to cook with later. Once your clay is baked and cooled, then you can start this painting process. First with that coat of paint to act as a primer, and then really digging into the details. It is not abnormal to have to redo coats of paint. The stuff that I use is this acrylic paint that you can get like at Michael's or AC Moore. It's very cheap, like usually 99 cents a bottle. So you can get it in tons of colors, but some of the colors seem to be more runny than others. Some come out of the bottle really thick. Others almost seem like water, even if you shake them first. So be prepared to put a couple coats of a color on to get the saturation level that you're looking for. Definitely start from the bottom up because otherwise you will make yourself crazy. I learned this from experience. So with this particular project, I started with the sage color and then added the blue in the background. Once I got that, how I wanted it, then I started working on like the vines, then the leaves, then the flowers, and then I did the bunny last. It also kind of depends on what colors you're using, because this bunny was white. Any mistake, like with the blue paint or the green paint, any of that that got onto the rabbit was going to show up on top of the white. So I waited to do that part until the very last, because that way everything else was dry and I wasn't in danger of accidentally putting paint on the rabbit that shouldn't be there. Okay. So that is the technique. I hopefully have given you some skills that you can use to make a design that works for you. Um, if you want to make a different type of animal besides a rabbit, you can follow a very similar procedure of starting with the body, then adding the head, adding ears or a tail or legs or whatever else it's got, and then really relying on the painting process to bring out those details. If you're making a larger animal, you may be able to get away with like actually drawing some of the details into the clay with your tools. But it just kind of depends on the size of the project and your comfort level with using those tools. I tend to like painting because I feel like I have more control that way, but feel free to give it a try. Right? If you don't like it, you can always start over. Okay. So I think that is all my tips. I hope that you can take some of these skills and apply them toward a project that is of interest to you. These magnets make really great gifts. So I know like Mother's Day is coming up, Easter's coming up, there's some different holidays. So this would be a great gift for a friend or a loved one. And you can really take these skills and use them to make the project your own, make it something unique. I would love to see what you make. If you have any questions about this project or about any of the techniques that we talked about, or just about the polymer clay more broadly, feel free to contact me. If you make this project and want to show me, I would love to see that as well. You can email me at jstanley@jtcc.edu. I hope you have an amazing spring break and a fantastic rest of the semester. We will be doing a couple more of these projects before the end of the semester, so keep an eye out for those. We'll have an Easter themed project later on in the month of March, and then in April, we'll be doing a project based on the video game series Animal Crossing. So if that is of interest to you, please feel free to come by for that workshop or to check out the video later if the schedule doesn't work for you. Take care, be safe, and I will see you next time. Thanks.